let us firstly say thank you to Heritage Lottery Wales, who've supported this project, which is about Tiger Bay, Butte Town and that area, and try to help people understand something about the place. HDA is grateful to them. This particular episode story is an explanation of which attempts to counter one of the nastier and more mischievous impressions about Tiger Bay and about Butte Town, in particular about Tiger Bay. Now, no one would say Tiger Bay was an area without crime. It certainly had gambling, but consistently in the papers and in material you'll read now, if you go onto Wikipedia and tap in Tiger Bay, you will find that it says area of high prostitution. In fact, what it says is the centre of prostitution in Cardiff at the time. The problem with that is it simply wasn't true. The crime figures don't show it, nor does the other evidence. What people do, lazy researchers and lazy people generally who want to collect stories, what they do is they say, well, it's in the newspaper. Well, the newspapers, much of them were attacks on Tiger Bay and its residents and people from other countries. But there was an article in Wales Online, was back in June 2019, when they talked about the Cardiff Peaky Blinders. And just like there was the Shelby family in Birmingham, who were the actual Peaky Blinders, Cardiff had its own. Their main area for prostitution were two streets, both of which were lined with brothels, Charlotte Street and Whitmore Lane. Now, if you're looking for them in Tiger Bay, well, you're not going to find them, because actually they were outside of Tiger Bay. They are now where you will find the Marriott Hotel. Both those streets will be under the Marriott and under the car park. And they were alongside the canal, which of course is gone as well. So if you were to compare a map now from 1851 to the present day, you'd find yourself digging up the lobby on Marriott Hotel with a JCB to find any remains of Charlotte Street in particular, but also Whitmore. Those areas were filled with pimps and prostitutes, gangsters and thieves. And there's a lot of research been done on this by a gentleman called Anthony Rees, whose relatives came from that area. There is no evidence to show Anthony Rees's relatives were part of those particular industries, but they came from that area. Now, what he's done in his work, and there's a book called Notorious and a great deal of research, he's identified some of these people. People like Ned Llewellyn, Liverpool Dick, and the aptly named John Thomas, we won't go there, were reported in the Cardiff Merthyr Guardian in 1847, because they used to kick and knock the poor girls about as a boy would a football. The canal that ran alongside those areas became known for suicides, with reports of prostitutes throwing themselves into the water in desperate bids to escape the horrors of their daily lives. Those canals were also full of numerous unwanted babies, some of which were drowned and others suffocated beforehand, and certainly dismembered bodies were also found bobbing in the water. But plenty of women were also involved as brothel keepers, such as Mrs. Prothero, who at 63 years of age was the oldest owner of the oldest brothel in Cardiff, and she got a lion's share of the business on Whitmore Lane, not least because Whitmore Lane was right next to a building where sailors got paid off after they arrived back from the ships. There were others like Mary the cripple, so-called because she had withered legs and could not walk. She was an amazing woman given her circumstances, says Mr. Rees, Imagine being a disabled woman living in the early Victorian period and still manage to carve out for yourself a 40-year career as the head of a small criminal empire, first in Newport and then in Cardiff. Her first arrest is recorded in 1835, when she got sent down for keeping a brothel, and she was still procuring girls in Cardiff in 1876, 41 years later, and her son Abraham Yardwood was still running brothels in Cardiff up until the 1920s. Now, you'll find very little about Charlotte Street or Whitmore, because it was such an embarrassment that actually they didn't talk about it. It wasn't much in the press because, well, I guess for those kind of areas to be such a great success, someone would need to know, and let's say someone would be assisting the criminals to try and make sure they did not end up in court. Now, all of the Petty Sessions books, that's the transcriptions from the court, are in the Glamorgan archives. Meanwhile, now if you think about where to drink in those streets, there would be places like the Lame Chicken, the Noah's Ark, the Flying Eagle, the Wild Wave, the Irishman's Glory, and the Coal Hole, all of which are gone. One pub may well survive. That's the Golden Cross, which started as the Shield and Newcastle in 1846, before changing its name several times. It was on what would have been the corner of Whitmore Lane and Bute Street. Now that's the only connection. Bute Street was at the very end of Bute Street. It wasn't part of the Bay. It was certainly not part of Bute Town. Now, there are very, very few pictures of the people from those times. There will only be on court record in mugshots. There is one such online on Wales Online of Swansea Dan, also known as Daniel Davis, a boatman and a bully from Whitmore Lane, and he was sent to Pentonville prison in 1876 for a firearms charge. Now, the connection between the boatman and the prostitution is quite important. An awful lot of boatmen, according to these records, were also what's called bullies. A bully was the other name for someone who was a pimp and operated a ring of prostitutes. We need to be clear. These people from Tiger Bay, they were not the people identified by the papers, which largely were these people from other countries, from overseas. The nearest most of these people came from being overseas is because at the time there was a strong connection between Irish families and crime. But the one thing we do know is someone needed to be blamed. And once again, that was Tiger Bay. And the many races who lived, possibly up to 45 different nationalities in modern terms, that lived in Tiger Bay. Now, I'm not saying there weren't prostitutes in Tiger Bay, but there is a big difference between prostitutes, which were all over Cardiff, brothels, which were all over Cardiff, and an occasional brothel, and the main centres. And the way most of that's described is that Tiger Bay was the main centre of prostitution. It was not. It was a residence for families, for merchant seamen in between ships, and for extremely wealthy pieces such as Mount Stuart Square, Loudon Square, etc. So the point of what I guess I'm trying to say here is, much is said about Tiger Bay. If you read something about it, I would suggest you say, where's the evidence? The Bay was a working class area full of people who lived their lives. And as the city got wealthier and wealthier from the work, much of it, of those working class people, it increasingly wanted to distance itself from the working class environment and those people from overseas. And they became the brunt and the blame for so much that was normal in Cardiff, and crime certainly was before the people from the Empire arrived in gangs operating in Cardiff regularly. But there is no evidence to show that the people from the Bay or the new people from overseas, in terms of certainly Africa, Arab countries, Caribbean countries, India, there's no evidence to show they were major players or running brothels or leaders in criminality. There is a great deal of evidence to show, however, they were family people. I hope this has helped you understand a people get labelled, and then conveniently that label stays because people quote a paper from 1850 or 1880 when there was no complaint against what was written in the press about you.